Hey there, curious friend. I'm Courtney, a certified peer support specialist, and welcome to Wonderland Unlocked. In this series, Curious Connections, we're diving into the twists and turns of friendships and relationships, exploring trust, growth, and those unexpected moments in between. Because in the world of connections, nothing is ever quite as it seems, but it's always worth unlocking together. Welcome back to Wonderland Unlocked, where we journey through the twists and turns of the mind, emotions, and relationships that shape us. Today, we're diving into a familiar, yet often overlooked experience in relationships: avoidance and withdrawal. If you've ever found yourself emotionally retreating, dodging difficult conversations, or feeling overwhelmed by intimacy, you're not alone. In the world of Alice in Wonderland, there's a character who embodies this quiet escape: the Dormouse. Nestled at the Mad Hatter's tea party, the Dormouse dozes off, barely engaging, speaking in sleepy riddles, and avoiding the chaos around him. And in many ways, we all have our Dormouse moments where we shut down rather than face what's in front of us. Today, we'll explore why we withdraw and how it impacts our relationships and what we can do when avoidance feels safer than connection. The Dormouse, curled up in his teapot, is the perfect metaphor for emotional withdrawal. He's present, but not really there, engaged, but not fully awake, and sometimes that's exactly how avoidance plays out in relationships. Emotional withdrawal can look like shutting down in the middle of an argument, avoiding serious discussions by changing the subject or making a joke, feeling overwhelmed by emotional closeness and pulling away, physically being in the room but feeling miles away mentally. For some of us, this pattern developed early. Maybe emotions weren't safe to express growing up. Maybe we were taught that silence was better than conflict. Or maybe when we did express ourselves, we weren't heard, so we learned to retreat instead. But avoidance doesn't just protect us. It isolates us. It can leave our partners, friends, and loved ones feeling confused, frustrated, or abandoned. So let's take a closer look at how emotional withdrawal affects our relationships. When we withdraw, the message we unintentionally send is, "You don't matter," or "This isn't important enough to deal with." But in reality, avoidance isn't about the other person. It's about our own discomfort. It's as if our inner world becomes too overwhelming, and the easiest escape is for us to retreat in silence. I personally struggled with shutting down in relationships. There were times when emotions felt too big, too overwhelming, so I'd disconnect. I'd listen to words but not really hear them. I'd nod along, pretending everything was fine, but inside, I was far away. It felt like my brain had found a hidden escape hatch, and before I knew it, I was gone. The problem? Withdrawal creates distance. The more we retreat, the more people we love feel like they're talking to a ghost. And that distance can turn into resentment, loneliness, and miscommunication. It's like a slow drift apart, each moment of silence stacking onto the last until what was once a vibrant connection feels faded and unrecognizable. But let's dig a little deeper. When one person withdraws, the other often begins to question their own worth. They might wonder, did I do something wrong? Or am I not enough? This internal dialogue can trigger a cascade of self-doubt and anxiety. Over time, the withdrawing partner's silence becomes a barrier that not only isolates them, but also isolates those who care about them. Research in psychology tells us that emotional withdrawal is often a defense mechanism, a way to protect ourselves from the vulnerability of truly feeling and sharing our emotions. It's a signal that there might be unresolved fears beneath the surface: fear of rejection, fear of being overwhelmed by another pain, or even fear of our own unhealed wounds. In this way, withdrawal serves as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it shields us momentarily from pain. On the other, it denies us the opportunity for genuine connection and healing. Consider a scenario where a friend reaches out during a moment of distress, only to be met with silence. That silence can speak volumes. It tells the friend that, perhaps unintentionally, they are not valued enough to be heard. And over time, that pattern erodes trust. Trust isn't built on absence. It's built on presence, even when it's messy or uncomfortable. So, why do we do this? Often, it's because dealing with raw emotion feels risky. Opening up means exposing ourselves to the possibility of further hurt. It means facing parts of ourselves that we might have buried away. And so, our minds opt for the quick escape, a mental timeout where the pain is muted, if only for a little while. Yet this escape comes at a cost. The more we withdraw, the more we isolate ourselves. And isolation, while it might offer short-term relief, only deepens the sense of disconnection in the long run. The cycle of withdrawal can lead to an emotional stalemate where both partners or friends, whether in a romantic relationship or a friendship, or even a family bond, feel unheard, unseen, and unimportant. Now, the big question remains, how can we step out of the teapot and back into the connection? It starts with awareness. Recognizing when you're beginning to shut down is the first crucial step. Once you've noticed that creeping silence, ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? What am I afraid of? Sometimes, even admitting that fear aloud can start to chip away at its power. Next comes communication. It may feel vulnerable to admit, I'm overwhelmed or I need a moment, but sharing that can transform the dynamic. Instead of leaving the other person guessing, you open a door for mutual understanding. You create space where both parties can express their needs without judgment. Finally, consider that withdrawal isn't a fixed state. It's a habit that can be unlearned. With practice, you can build resilience against the impulse to disconnect. Whether it's through mindfulness, journaling, or even therapy, learning to sit with discomfort rather than escape it can lead to a more authentic, connected life. So, as we reflect on the impact of withdrawal, let's challenge ourselves to lean into those difficult emotions rather than run from them. Let's remember that every time we choose presence over avoidance, we are affirming that the people in our lives truly do matter, and that we too deserve to be heard. Our brains are wired to avoid discomfort. When we experience emotional stress, our nervous system might activate a freeze response, the psychological equivalent of playing dead. In that moment, our body and mind hits the brakes, as if saying, hold on, this is too much to handle right now. For some, withdrawal feels safer than confrontation. If past experiences taught us that conflict leads to pain, our brains might say, nope, not going there. So we disassociate, detach, or distract ourselves, hoping that by stepping away, we'll avoid the potential hurt. This response is deeply rooted in our biology. When our brain detects threat, whether physical or emotional, it triggers a cascade of reactions. The amygdala lights up, setting off the stress response and releasing hormones like cortisol. The system was designed to keep us safe in the face of danger. But when applied to emotional conflict, it often shuts down instead of helping us engage. This is especially common for those of us with anxiety, trauma, or attachment wounds. Avoidance can become our default mode of self-protection, a habit that once helped us survive real threats, but now stands in the way of forming deep, meaningful connections. Imagine being at a dinner party. Just as the conversation turns personal, your heart starts racing, and you suddenly feel the urge to retreat. That immediate escape might protect you in the moment, Yet over time, it leaves gaps in your relationships. The problem is, what once protected us now holds us back. When we constantly withdraw, we miss out on the messy, unpredictable, yet ultimately enriching aspects of life. Think about it. What happens when the Dormouse stays asleep? He misses the madness, the laughter, the chaos that makes life interesting. And when we shut down, we miss the depth, growth, and intimacy that make relationships meaningful. Furthermore, withdrawal can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we retreat, the more people we care about feel disconnected and unloved. Their confusion or hurt can reinforce our fear, making it even harder to step back into the conversation. Over time, this cycle not only isolates us, but can also build up layers of resentment, both in ourselves and in those around us. Yet, understanding the science behind our reactions gives us a roadmap to change. Research in neuroscience tells us that our brains are remarkably plastic, capable of rewiring and forming new connections with practice and intention. By gradually exposing ourselves to the discomfort of vulnerability, we can begin to retrain our responses. Techniques such as mindfulness, journaling, or even therapy can help us acknowledge and process our fears rather than shutting them down. In essence, while avoiding may feel like a safe haven in the short term, it ultimately deprives us of the rich, messy experiences that foster genuine connection. It's not about forcing ourselves into confrontation, but about learning to sit with the discomfort and allowing ourselves the full spectrum of human emotion. By doing so, we pave the way for growth, deeper understanding, and more authentic relationships. So, as we reflect on why we withdraw, let's challenge ourselves to recognize these patterns and gently work towards breaking them. In understanding our biological and emotional wiring, we take the first step towards not only protecting ourselves, but also truly engaging with the world and with those who matter most. So, how do we step out of avoidance and into presence? Recognize when you're withdrawing. Notice the signs. Zoning out, getting quiet, feeling like you're shutting down. Awareness is the first step. Pause and name what's happening. Saying, I feel overwhelmed right now, or I need a moment, can help bridge the gap between shutting down and engaging. Communicate your need for space. Avoidance often feels like rejection to others. Instead of disappearing, try saying, I need a little time to process, but I'll come back to this. Use grounding techniques. Deep breaths, holding something tangible, or even wiggling your fingers can help bring you back to the present. Practice small moments of engagement. If deep emotional talks feel too intense, start with smaller connections. Eye contact, a touch, a simple I hear you. These small steps build safer over time. The Dormouse might be comfortable in his sleepy world, but he's also missing out, and we don't have to stay stuck in avoidance. Breaking the cycle doesn't mean forcing ourselves into discomfort all at once. It means gently stepping forward, learning that connection doesn't have to be scary. It's okay to need space. It's okay to struggle with vulnerability. But it's also okay to take small, intentional steps towards staying present. Think about a moment when you wanted to withdraw, but chose to stay. How did it feel? Maybe it was uncomfortable, but was there also relief, connection, understanding? Our relationships aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be real. And real connection happens when we dare to stay present, even when it's hard. But staying present doesn't mean we have to be fearless. It doesn't mean that we won't struggle with the urge to retreat. It simply means we learn to recognize that urge and choose, even in the smallest ways, to resist disappearing completely. Maybe that looks like staying in a difficult conversation for 5 minutes longer than we normally would. Maybe it's allowing ourselves to express something honestly, even if we fear being misunderstood. Maybe it's just taking a deep breath and reminding ourselves, I am safe. I can be here. I don't have to run. The first few steps will feel unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable, and that's okay. Growth always feels a little uncertain at first, but over time, as we practice staying instead of slipping away, we teach ourselves something powerful. We are capable of connection, even in the face of discomfort. The truth is, withdrawing doesn't protect us from pain. It just prolongs it. When we shut people out, we deny ourselves the opportunity to be reassured, to be comforted, to be understood. We trade a moment of vulnerability for a longer stretch of loneliness. And while solitude can be restorative, isolation, especially when it stems from avoidance, rarely heals what we hope it will. So how do we rewrite the story? How do we wake up, stretch, and step back into the tea party of life when it feels chaotic? We start small. We practice awareness. When do we tend to withdraw? What triggers that response? We remind ourselves that avoidance isn't our only option. We allow ourselves to take risks in connection, understanding that not every conversation has to be perfect. Not every interaction has to be comfortable. What matters is that we're showing up. And maybe, just maybe, we learn to appreciate the madness of it all, because life, real, meaningful life, happens in the moments when we engage. It happens in the messy, unscripted, unpredictable spaces where love, connection, and growth take root. So, as you move forward, ask yourself, where can I lean in instead of pulling away? Where can I allow myself to be seen, even just a little more? And when the urge to retreat arises, picture the Dormouse, nestled in his teapot, missing out on the laughter, the stories, the warmth of the world around him. Then remind yourself, you don't have to miss out too. Wake up, step forward, join the conversation, because you belong there. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a question. In what ways do you see the Dormouse in yourself? And what's one small step you can take towards staying present, even when avoidance feels easier? Remember, you don't have to go from asleep to wide awake overnight. Just start by opening your eyes one moment at a time. Thank you for joining me in this conversation. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can connect with me on social media, or if you found this episode helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep unlocking Wonderland.